The Wyoming plains stretched out like an ocean of grass, rolling endlessly beneath the wide and pitiless sky. Out here, silence was a man's closest companion, and for James Calder, that silence was all he had ever wanted. James was a seasoned cowboy, his frame strong from years in the saddle, his face carved by wind and sun into the hardened lines of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little. His ranch sat a mile off the main road, modest but steady, fenced in with sweat and stubborn pride. He had horses, a few dozen cattle, and a loyal dog named Rusty who followed him like a shadow. Beyond that, he wanted nothing, or so he told himself. He had once believed in marriage, in the promises of hearth and home, but those hopes had been buried long ago. His mother died when he was barely a man. His father lost to a mine collapse not long after, and the woman he once thought he'd marry had chosen another, someone with deeper pockets and more land to his name. James never forgot the sting. That betrayal hardened his heart, until he swore a vow he carried to this very day: never again. Neighbors whispered about him at church and at the trading post. Some said he was too proud for his own good. Others murmured he was too broken, living out his days like a ghost who had chosen work over warmth. But when the nights grew long and the coyotes sang in the distance, James sometimes wondered if the whispers were true. Loneliness gnawed at him like an old wound. Yet each time he would smother the ache and remind himself, a man is safer alone. The prairie sky turned black long before nightfall, clouds rolling heavy and low as the wind whipped dry grass into frantic waves. James Calder knew the storm was coming. He could feel it in the prickle of the air, in the uneasy stamping of the horses in their corral. He worked quickly, leading the stallion and mares into the barn. Rusty padded at his heels, ears pricked at the distant rumble. Inside, James fastened the gate and checked the feed, the storm pressing closer with every heartbeat. Lightning cracked across the horizon, throwing jagged shadows against the barn's wooden walls. Just as James was pulling the last latch shut, he heard it. Footsteps. Not the sure stride of a ranch hand or neighbor, but hurried, stumbling, uneven. His hand drifted instinctively toward the revolver at his hip. The barn door creaked open with a sudden gust, and there she was. A woman. Her hair hung in tangled strands, her dress torn at the sleeve, and across her cheek bloomed the dark mark of a bruise. She clutched the doorframe as though it alone kept her upright. Rusty growled, low and uncertain, until James raised a steady hand. "Easy, boy." The woman's voice trembled as she spoke. I just need a place out of the storm. Please, just for tonight." Her eyes, haunted, desperate, met his, and James felt the weight of her fear, as surely as the thunder rattling the barn roof. He hesitated. Strangers brought trouble out here. Trouble could mean bullets, blood, or worse. And yet, he couldn't ignore the sight of her, bruised and shaking, standing there as if she'd run until her soul nearly broke. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Barn ain't much, but it's dry. Sit yourself down." The woman sank onto a bale of hay, holding her side as though every breath carried pain. Lightning flared again, painting her face pale and fragile, and for the first time in years, James Calder felt the walls of his solitude tremble. The storm howled through the night, rain lashing against the barn walls, but inside, a quieter storm gathered between the two strangers. James leaned against a post, arms crossed, watching the woman as she sat hunched on the hay bale. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale, and in the flickering lantern light the truth of her injuries became clearer. A bruise stretched across her cheek, raw and angry. When her sleeve slipped back, James caught sight of dark rope burns, scarring her wrists, fresh enough that the skin was still red and swollen. He looked away, jaw tightening. Whoever had put those marks on her hadn't just wanted to frighten her. They had wanted to break her. Rusty trotted closer, sniffing at the stranger with cautious curiosity. At first she flinched, but when the dog rested his head on her knee, something shifted. Her hand, trembling at first, came to rest in his fur. For the first time since she stumbled in, her lips curved into the faintest smile. James broke the silence at last. "You got a name?" She hesitated. eyes flickering as though she weighed the danger of saying it aloud. Finally she whispered, "Clara." Nothing more, no last name, no history offered. James didn't press. He had lived long enough to know that sometimes silence told more truth than words. Still, he asked carefully, "You runnin' from someone?" Clara's gaze dropped, her fingers clutching Rusty's fur tighter. "Better the wilderness takes me than him." Her voice cracked, but there was steel beneath it, a quiet defiance. James studied her, unsettled by the weight of her words. She was bruised, broken down, yet there was a fire in her eyes that hadn't been put out. He admired it, though he tried hard not to. He reminded himself of the vow he had sworn long ago. No ties, no promises. A cowboy lived freer alone, and yet, watching Clara sit there, fragile but unyielding, James felt a pull he hadn't felt in years. A pull he wasn't ready to name. Dawn broke slow and heavy after the storm, the prairie glistening with rain. James pushed open the barn doors, letting in the pale wash of morning light. The world felt cleansed, as if the night's violence had been washed away, but Clara's troubles had not. She stirred restlessly on the hay, her eyes darting toward the horizon. James followed her gaze, and saw them. Two riders on the ridge, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. Clara froze. The color drained from her face. "They've found me." James's hand moved instinctively to the butt of his revolver. "Who are they?" Her voice broke as she whispered, "My husband's men." The word husband struck like a stone in the quiet barn. James turned to her, his brow furrowed. Clara's eyes brimmed with desperation. "I never chose him. He forced me into marriage, kept me locked away like property. Every bruise you see, every scar, I earned trying to fight him." Her voice shook, but she met James's gaze squarely. "If they take me back, I won't survive." James stood rooted in place, the oath of his life pounding in his head. He had sworn never to bind himself to another soul, never again to risk the pain of loss or betrayal. And yet here she was, bruised and trembling, looking at him as though he were the last wall between her and the abyss. Rusty growled low, sensing the danger drawing closer. James clenched his jaw. Every instinct told him to stay out of it, to send her on her way, but another voice, the one buried deep in his chest, rose louder. What kind of man watched a woman dragged back to torment, and did nothing? He stepped forward, planting himself in the barn doorway, broad shoulders blocking Clara from sight. "They won't take you," he said, his voice low, steady, final. Clara stared at him, tears shining in her eyes, not of fear this time, but of fragile trust, and in that moment, James Calder, the cowboy who had vowed never to marry, never to love, made his choice. The two riders descended from the ridge, with the swagger of men used to taking what they wanted. Dust kicked up around their horses' hooves, as they reined in just outside the barn. James stood tall in the doorway, shoulders squared, revolver resting loosely at his side. Rusty growled low, his hackles raised. One of the men spat into the dirt before speaking. "Mornin', Calder. We're lookin' for a runaway. Little thing, dark hair, bruise on her face, belongs to Mr. Harlan." His eyes narrowed. "You seen her?" James's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Ain't seen nobody but my own stock." The second rider shifted in the saddle, gaze sweeping past James, as if to catch a glimpse inside the barn. "Don't lie to us. Harlan don't take kindly to folks hidden his property." That word, property, lit something hot in James's chest. He stepped forward, boots grinding against the wet earth. "No woman belongs to any man." The first rider's hand hovered over his holster. "Careful now, Calder. You don't want trouble with Harlan." James's revolver was up before the man even touched his gun. A single shot cracked the morning air, the bullet kicking dust inches from the rider's boots. Horses reared, nostrils flaring, and both men cursed, startled by his speed. "Next one won't miss," James said evenly, his gaze like steel. For a tense moment, the only sound was the whinny of nervous horses, and the echo of the gunshot fading into the hills. Then with snarls and muttered threats, the riders yanked their reins, and turned back toward the ridge. "This ain't over, Calder," one shouted as they galloped off. Silence settled again, broken only by Rusty's low bark. Behind James, Clara trembled, hands pressed against her mouth. Tears slipped down her bruised cheek, not of fear this time, but of relief. "You didn't have to." James holstered his revolver, glancing at her. "Maybe not," he said, voice rough but steady, "but some things are worth standin' for." And for the first time in years, he knew he believed it. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm. Clara remained on the ranch, her body mending little by little beneath the wide prairie sky. The bruises on her face faded to pale shadows, the rope burns on her wrists softened, and though the pain lingered in her eyes, she began to stand a little straighter each morning. James kept to his chores, but soon Clara was at his side, determined to pull her weight. She carried buckets of water, fed the chickens, even tried her hand at mending a broken fence post. At first, James worried she might push herself too hard, but when he heard her laugh, light, uncertain, yet real, he didn't stop her. That sound filled the empty spaces of the ranch, more surely than the wind ever could. Word traveled quickly in town. Folks whispered that James Calder, the cowboy who swore he'd never marry, finally had company. Some said Clara was a burden, others claimed she was a blessing. James ignored them all, yet each evening, as the sun set fire to the horizon, James found himself lingering near her side. He told himself it was routine, nothing more, but deep down, he knew his heart was softening, stitch by stubborn stitch. The prairie evening glowed with gold and crimson, as Clara leaned against the fence, watching the cattle drift lazily across the pasture. The wind tugged at her hair, but her eyes were fixed far beyond the horizon. When James approached, she spoke softly, as if confessing a secret to the land itself. "I don't want to run anymore," she whispered, "but I don't want to tie you down with my troubles. I'm already too much of a burden." James stood beside her, silent for a long moment, then with a slow breath, he said, "Years back, I made myself a vow, swore I'd never marry, never let anyone close again, thought it'd spare me hurt." He paused, his gaze steady on hers. "But truth is, all it did was leave me empty." Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. James tipped his hat back, voice low but certain. "I don't want you here out of duty, Clara. I want you here because I finally found something worth holding on to. Stay with me." Her tears spilled then, but they came with a trembling smile. She nodded, placing her hand in his, and as the sun melted into the horizon, James, Clara and Rusty stood together, no longer alone.